Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, all of it really. Because today, I'm going to make something that I should have made a long time ago. And frankly, I'm surprised it doesn't already exist. I get a decent number of people in the comments on my lore videos these days talking about how they're new to Dead by Daylight and stumble across my videos. Or don't really know much about the lore before they take a look. I am, of course, glad you're here and I'm happy you seem to be getting what you want. I can't help but feel like a parent who gave their child a claymore mine and a brick of cocaine for their first birthday. This isn't what you should be starting out with. It doesn't feel like an in-depth analysis of psychiatric conditions or a Dan Brown-esque smorgasbord of conspiracy theories. Should really be the first thing you ever watch about the game's lore. So that's what this video is going to be. A starter's guide to Dead by Daylight lore, for people who are starting from nothing and want to learn about the story behind the game. We won't be looking at individual characters so much as the bigger picture. Basic concepts such as the entity, the trials, and the importance of survivors and killers. So without further ado, let's get going. The central point of all of Dead by Daylight storytelling, and the very reason for the game's existence in the first place, is the entity. The entity is a being from outside our dimension that is both composed of and feeds off extreme emotion to survive. It does not have a measurable physical form, no set size or limitations. If you're familiar with Silent Hill or the Cthulhu mythos of H.P. Lovecraft, you will recognise the entity as an eldritch monstrosity, similar to the ones seen in those franchises. It's even referred to with terms associated with the elder gods of the Cthulhu mythos, such as Ancient and Old One. It controls its own pocket world, the realms of the entity, and there, it is functionally God. It constructs everything we see in the game, from the maps to the crows, except for the characters, out of a substance called auric cells, which is relevant in the game since auric cells are the currency you can buy with real-world money for characters or cosmetics. This means that the realms and the maps we see in the game are effectively made out of our money. Indeed, comrades, we have seized the means of map production. The realms are designed by the entity as copies of real-world locations that were stricken by a violent tragedy, such as the Larry's Memorial Institute, Silent Hill, and the Macmillan Estate. The maps we see in the game are sections of those realms, and one realm can contain multiple maps, such as the 5 maps make up the Macmillan Estate realm, or just one, like Midwich Elementary School being the only map in the Silent Hill realm. But if these maps are meant to be copies of areas in the real world, why are they full of generators and pallets? In some realms, like Coldwind Farm or the Macmillan Estate, these make some maps sense. But last I checked, preschools didn't have pallets propped up in the hallways, and ancient Babylonian temples didn't come with a generator in the basement. And why does the map randomise itself every time if it's a copy of a real place? The answer is very simple. The entity isn't human. It doesn't know what does or does not belong or make sense in the world. So it just puts what it needs into the maps and doesn't really know or care whether it's consistent or makes any sense at all. The survivors need something to do and somewhere to do it. Generators are something to do, so the entity puts generators in places. That's all that really matters to it. As long as the survivors have somewhere to participate in the trials, the entity isn't too fussed about the details. Speaking of the survivors and the trials, this is how the entity harvests the emotions it feeds off. Everything from the selection of killers and survivors to the choice of places of violence as the maps is engineered to elicit as much emotion from survivors as possible. That is their purpose. Livestock to be farmed over and over again, to nourish the entity with their psyches and emotional responses. The fear of death at the hands of the killers, the agony of the torment they inflict, but also the hope of escaping them, and the steely resolve of the friendships forged in the fog. The entity feeds off all these things. Whether the survivors escape or die, the entity gets what it wants. The killers themselves offer some sustenance of their own, as the hook and sacrifice system becomes a ritual to show their devotion to the entity and prepare the survivor for having their emotions consumed by it. That's why most of the time, killers sacrifice survivors to the entity via the hooks, instead of killing them themselves. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the entity allows the killer to execute one or more survivors themselves as a reward. We call these rewards memento moris. And some killers don't use the hook system at all, demonstrating their lack of fealty to the entity. Right now, those killers are Michael Myers, who often kills survivors himself in the same way as he killed his sister Judith, and Pyramid Head, who disregards the entity altogether and torments survivors in his own brutal ways. Notably, not all killers are willing participants in the entity's trials. While many, such as the Clown, Ghostface and Michael Myers, chose to enter the fog and become the entity's killers, not all were so compliant. The metal spikes protruding from the trapper's shoulders are a means that the entity uses to control him, by punishing him with torture if he strays from its plans. And the Doctor's face gear is said to have been applied by the entity as punishment for his reluctance to work for anyone other than himself. Still others were deceived into the entity's clutches, such as the Plague, or made deals with the entity to exchange favours or gifts for their service, such as the Spirit. I've done videos on several of these killers so far, with much more to come, so if you're interested in that, please do take a look around. Survivors in Dead by Daylight do not have a pleasant existence. To give you a sense of the life cycle of a survivor, let me express it like this. You're scooped up from your normal life and dumped into an unfamiliar and hellish new reality, where you're pitted against a murderous killer with 3 total strangers to help you escape this horrible game of cat and mouse. Say you succeed. Say you fight for your life in the trial and make it back to the campfire, where you talk to other people in your position and learn that this is their lives now. A never-ending struggle for survival day to day at the mercy of these inhuman monsters. And for days, maybe weeks back to back, you are constantly hurled into trial after trial, barely escaping with your life as your newfound friends die around you. You learn your way around the monsters and madmen that lurk in the fog, and before you know it, you start to get more confident and fear for your life a little less each time, until eventually your luck runs out, and you're impaled on a meat hook for the last time, as the entity hauls your lifeless body away. And you awake at the campfire again, your memories of the trials you've lived through gone. It's just like your first day in this horrific place. The entity has reset your memories back to when you were first taken, ready to experience that dread, horror and torment over and over again for the rest of your days, until your soul is ground away and the entity has no further use for you. What happens to you then? The entity sends spent survivors to the void, a desolate sub-realm, where lost and lifeless souls wander the abyss forever. No hope remains there. The struggle for life and freedom has been fought and lost already. It is the only ending most survivors will ever get to see. Most, but not all. There are a couple of characters who exist in the entity's world who are not part of its cruel games. Most notably, the Observer and Vigo. I get a lot of questions about these two figures and who they are, and they're 2 of the most common sources of speculation in Dead by Daylight's lore, so I'd like to go over them briefly. A lot of people don't know who the Observer is, and spend their time making wild guesses about his identity. Some say he's Felix Richter's father, trapped in the entity's world. Others say he's a good version of the entity who is trying to help the survivors. I have a word to describe people like that who promote these theories. The word is illiterates, because it's written down in fairly plain English who and what the Observer actually is. The Observer is the last person left, from an alternate universe that the entity has already cleared out. Everyone in his version of Earth, referred to as Terra, has been processed and devoured by the entity, and he only survives by hiding in a sub-realm within the entity's dimension. He is in possession of a device called the Auris, which he can use to explore the memories of the other fog dwellers, both survivors and killers alike. He stores these memories in the archives, which is why the in-game icon for the archives is a version of the Auris. Judging by the name and descriptions found in various archive stories, the Auris works by manipulating the auric cells that make up the entity's world. which would also explain how he's able to hide from the entity despite being trapped in its world. The Observer seeks to destroy the entity, to starve it of emotion, so that its feasting on numberless innocent souls can be put to an end. He suggests that the auric particles that make up the entity's realm exist on all worlds, and can be manipulated by the collective consciousness of their residents, and that the entity preys on civilizations and worlds that haven't figured this out yet, such as our own. This may be the key to beating it for good. If the survivors can learn that their collective consciousness can manipulate the realms of the entity like the Observer does, they might be able to defeat it, and secure their final escape. This is where Vigo comes in. Vigo is a mysterious character who, according to behaviour themselves, was a survivor, but is not one anymore. There are many possible ways to interpret this, and a lot of people read this as Vigo having gone from being a survivor into being a killer. This led to speculation that Vigo was the true identity of the Blight, but that idea was shot down when it was revealed that the Blight's real name is actually Talbot Grimes, and that he was trying to follow in Vigo's footsteps after finding his journal. This journal, and what Talbot found in it, gives us a lot of information about Vigo and his goals, and what he might be doing now. Vigo is experimenting to try to find a way to escape the realms of the entity, and it's entirely possible that he's already succeeded. He was an inventor and researcher, able to carve out his own little sub-realm much like the Observer, to build himself a laboratory and start his experiments. It's suggested that since the entity did not create the hatch, that it came into existence from Vigo's attempts to escape, and it's confirmed in the Blight's archive stories that part of experimentation involved using the serum of pustula flowers, which bloom from the entity once a year during the Hallowed Blight. It would make sense that he was a survivor if he did find a way to escape the entity's realms, and it also opens the door for more potential escapes by other survivors, or even perhaps killers, later down the line. Whether this is something that could happen to the survivor Benedict Baker, whose journal serves as introductory notes for several other characters, or whether this is indicative of a direction that a bigger future story could travel in, we'll just have to wait and see. And with that, that's basically everything you need to know about the world of Dead by Daylight. Almost everything in the game has some sort of lore explanation, be it tenuous or otherwise. I think I covered the basics of everything that doesn't specifically relate to a certain killer or survivor. If you do want to know about a certain killer or survivor, take a look at my older videos. You might find what you're looking for there, but if I haven't got around to them yet, let me know what you want to see. If you think I've missed something important, then again, comment down below and I'd love to hear what you thought. Assuming all goes well, the full tome review and the Silent Hill chapter discussion will be next on the list and coming soon. The channel's gone through unbelievable growth in the last few weeks, and I thank you all for that. I really do hope we can keep going from strength to strength as we progress down the road of monetization and beyond. Guys, gals and other pals, this is the Lore Guy here at Pixelbush Entertainment, signing off. Good night to you all.
On the front exit.
See where Alec popped the gen? He's a pedo, man. Yeah. Here, go to where Alec popped the gen.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.